Welcome to another Digital Photo Mentor video. Today I have something a little different for you. I have a special guest that I asked to come and join me and have a discussion about photography education. And she's going to show you how she took her images from the ones you see on the left to what you see on the right in less than a year. I was totally blown away by the amount of progress she's managed to make in this amount of time, and I wanted to find out how she did it so that you could benefit from that as well. Let's get started. I am honored today to have a special guest, Lydia Larman. I met her on Facebook and I was so impressed with her work. And when I found out she's only been doing photography for a year, I felt like I wanted to talk to her and find out how she's done this and how you can learn from her as well. Thanks for joining me, Lydia.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
I'm excited to learn more about your photography journey because you've come really far in a year. And a lot of questions I get from my readers and my followers is, how do I improve my photography faster? And I feel like you've got some sort of magic pill that you found to do that. So let's dive into a little bit about your history. So when did you first get into photography?
So I started doing photography about a year ago. So last March, I started picking up the camera. I was on YouTube and I really liked a lot of the photographers that I was following, but I really didn't see myself as a photographer or a creative. And so I would usually just admire other people's work and be like, oh, I wish. And then eventually I was like, you know what, I'm just going to do it. So I didn't have a camera. So I drove to my sister's house. I texted her on my way there. I was like, I'm going to go pick up your camera. I'm going to get into photography. It's all good. You'll get it back eventually. And so that's basically just kind of how I started. I texted another friend of mine the same day and was like, can we shoot tomorrow? And she was like, sure. So that's kind of how I got started. So that was last March. And then since then, I've just been growing and growing in my learning stuff.
Awesome. So you started before you even had a camera. That's
Yeah, I did.
So that leads me to my next question, because always people ask about, okay, you're doing this amazing photography. You must have, a full frame camera and the top of the line, everything. So what gear are you shooting with now? And tell me, what was the first lens that you bought that was not a kit lens?
So the camera that I'm shooting with now, I actually only recently have. So I've only done a couple of the shoots with this camera. Most of my photos that I've taken was with my sister's crop frame camera. But so currently I'm shooting with the Canon Mark D5, the Mark D2, sorry. And before that, I was shooting with her Canon 650. So that was a crop frame that was probably at least like 10, 12 years old. So that was what I was shooting with for the majority of the year, and just with the kit lens for most of it. Eventually I was looking into camera gear and lenses, and I wanted something that was very versatile because I wasn't 100% sure yet what I wanted to shoot with. I looked at prices and they were insane. So I was like, well, looks like I'm getting a cheap one. So the first lens I actually ended up buying was just the 50 millimeter 1.8 lens. So that one was really great. It was also really cool because it was my first prime lens. So it was the first time I really got to shoot with something that didn't really move. And I found that as I was shooting with that, it got me a little bit more into my photography as well, just because I was moving around the frames a little bit more. I was trying more angles. I was trying different positions and everything as well. And so that kind of changed the way I saw photography as well, just changing my lens.
Do you find that the 50, and that's one that I recommend too for people's first lens, so that's awesome that you did that. Yeah. Do you find that when you got the 50, you were actually less lazy, like it made you work a little harder?
Oh, 100%. Because again, right, with a prime, you really, if you want to move the framing, you have to move your body or you have to move the person. But a lot of times, if I'm like, oh, okay, I just want just a little bit more, then I'm suddenly moving back, but I find that maybe I'm also moving up or down as I'm doing that. And then I'm like, oh, wait, I actually really like that too, or I really like that as well. And so you absolutely are, I feel like I'm way more involved in my photos when I am using something with like a prime lens, for sure. So.
Oh, I like that. More involved in your photos. I call it zooming with your feet.
Yeah.
Get off your butt, people.
Right? Oh, totally. it's easy to just, when you have like a zoom lens, just be like, okay, I'm just gonna come up close now, and then you just zoop.
Right.
So yeah.
So when you first started, did you aspire to be a professional? And if you didn't, do you now? Like where did you start off and where are you at now?
So when I very, very first started, I just started off wanting to see if I even liked it. That was basically, I gave myself a year. I told myself, okay, in a year, if I decide I like photography, then I'm 100% going all in. But even at the time, I knew that I wanted to go into more of the fashion realm and portraits and everything. And so I was already looking at the best of the best and just being like, oh, that's really amazing. Maybe if I do photography, that is 100% where I'd want to go to. So in a sense, yes, I would have always wanted to go. And then at the same time, the first year was definitely not a pressure year either. It wasn't like I have to be this good or I have to do this or that. It was just, do I like it enough to want to go into getting better or not? And then if I do, then 100% I'm.
So that actually brings me to another really good question, which is a lot of people believe that you're either born with it, you're a photographer, or you're not, right? What are your thoughts around that?
I used to be one of those people, and now I'm 100% not one of those people, because I can even just see it in my work from a year ago and to now. And when I post on my new images, and friends, family, people that know the work that I used to do and see the work that I'm putting out now, they're like, whoa, you have gotten so much better. And a lot of that is just practicing and getting more creative and like learning a lot more. So it 100% your creativity is a work in progress, and that's something that I'm still trying to work on. And I think also just allowing yourself to think a little bit outside of the box, and thinking things that maybe you think, oh, that might be kind of weird. And I think sometimes creativity comes from those places where you think it might be weird, or somebody else might think it's weird, but right, like the more you do it, you're like, oh, okay, whatever, I don't actually care. If it's something that you really like, then it's, at least you'll be happy that you produced it because you like it. And then if other people also like it, then great. So
I totally agree with that, because there's lots of actually studies been done, and I think Pablo Picasso said something similar to this, and Brené Brown, if you know Brené Brown,
yeah,
that creativity is actually, we're born with it and we lose it, right? So it's the opposite, and we actually have to work to keep it, because if we think about like in school, the kids in school, like if a child draws a purple horse with 6 legs and shows it to the teacher, and they get told, well, that's not what a horse looks like, you need to draw it this way, they need to fit into that box, right? Like you said, think outside the box. So as a kid, you're born thinking outside the box, and then you're told, okay, you need to fit here, and you need to check these boxes. So I think we need to unlearn that,
right. As a kid, you're like, think inside the box.
Exactly.
So, totally. Like, okay.
So how have you done most of your education? Like, are you reading ebooks? Are you doing online courses? Have you done workshops? Did you go to college? Like, what have you done?
So most of my learning has been through online courses, as well as in the very, very beginning, because I was having a hard time grasping some of the concepts. And so I really wanted a more in-person, and being able to just talk to somebody and actually saying like, okay, I'm on the settings that you said right now, but it's not doing what I thought it was doing, right? So being able to have that feedback. And so I took a couple of actual workshops as well, through the Canadian Photography Learning Center. I found a lot of different types of courses that way, like ones that are very technical and then ones that are a lot more creative as well. And so I like having that mix of having that technical aspect where I'm like, okay, now I need to learn how to actually use this camera. I need to learn how to actually use Photoshop and Lightroom and all that stuff. And then also learning more like, okay, how does like a film director look at things, or how does like a painter look at things, and just different aspects of that as well. And just like, let's just practice composition and that kind of stuff as well. So I like to have like a mix of both the technical stuff and the more artistic stuff. And I find that online is great.
That's brilliant, because again, that's exactly what I teach. Like, I feel like you're like, right, you're so fine with everything I teach, because it is. And I find that when students come to me, they either have a pretty good grasp of the technical, but they're lacking the artistic or the aesthetic, or the
Right.
opposite. They have the aesthetic, but they can't master the technical stuff. It's too
Yeah.
complicated, the Photoshop, the math, photography is
Yeah.
math, right?
Oh, totally.
And putting the two together is really important for sure.
Absolutely.
So of those things, which do you feel helped you progress the farthest, the most? Which method of
Oh,
learning has helped you progress fastest?
I would say the online stuff. Actually, like doing the online stuff, I don't go through them very fast. I honestly will take like one thing that I really want to do. Maybe I'll see like a picture or a photographer's something that I really like, and I'm like, oh, okay, I'm gonna learn that, and then I'll find videos to help me learn that. So if it's like a lighting technique, or if it's just like a type of black and white, or I don't know, whatever it is, or maybe I just want to get better at shooting portraits outdoor and whatever it is. So I'll just look those things up in specifically, and then I'll go and try to find courses, or whether it's YouTube courses or books or something like that, to learn that. And then I'll try to shoot it myself with other people. So that's how I kind of go through it. So I don't really have like a set um, goal for myself to like go through this whole course. Like there's courses that I've started and I haven't even looked at them again in like 5 months, just because I got what I needed from that course at the time, and I know I can always go back through and look at the next piece later, or maybe in a year from now I'll want to look at maybe the editing, maybe like a video side of that course or something like that. And so I can always go back to that later and work on that as well. So I would say the online stuff has been the biggest help for me for sure. And then a
Awesome.
combination of books. So.
I think you said a couple of really important pieces, which is, first of all, do one thing at a time,
Yeah.
and then learn it, but then do it, right? Because a lot of people
Absolutely.
will take like a billion online courses, but then they don't actually go out and try it or apply those things. And that's the biggest piece, right? Because you learn by applying it, making some mistakes, and then correct it and do it again. So a couple of things you said that are really important there. I find that like people doing my portrait class, and I know you may have started doing that one, do the first part where it's all about the natural light and everything, and then they get up to the flash section and they're like, oh, I'm not ready for that. And a lady got in touch with me that was doing my course, and she said, now I'm ready for flash, and I'm going back to it like a year later. So exactly
totally.
what you just said.
Yeah. And I'm like, whatever, like if I know I have this course and I still have access to this course, I'm not in a rush. Like I can take great images. If I can learn to be really good at like the natural light in this year, like I can still do so much with the natural light, and then I can slowly start adding maybe one flash or then two or whatever it is, and then just get better and better. Yeah.
Exactly. So what things, I have a question for you, philosophical questions. What three things do you know now that you wish you knew when you started a year ago? So maybe mistakes that you made, or what do you wish that you knew then that you know now?
One of the biggest things I would say is the importance of like your planning process. I think the biggest improvements in my photos have been made because of my planning process. Instead of just kind of showing up and saying to the person, oh, just come with your favorite outfit. Because to me, what they would have thought maybe was their favorite outfit or something that would maybe not go well with the background or what I had planned, or maybe I wanted something more like businessy, and they come in like this flowy dress, and I'm like, oh, that's definitely not the vision I had at all for the shoot, right? So, or like the color schemes and things like that. And so even my pre-planning process for the shoot now is a lot more intense. Like if I am doing a creative shoot, I will have them like send me pictures of the outfits that they're actually going to wear. And then I'll have their hair like, okay, can you wear your hair like this, and can you do this, and so very much having that pre-planning process, and then also building rapport. Like the rapport has been, I think, probably, other than the pre-planning, the rapport is probably the second most important thing I find. Just being able to have somebody comfortable in front of your camera, having that dialogue with them, because I've shot with friends that I'm very comfortable with outside of even just doing the photos, but it's something totally different when I bring up that camera to them and they're like,
Uh-huh.
oh, okay, wait a minute. Now I'm not really Ludia to them anymore. Now I'm that person with that big camera that's in their face. And I'm like, just do this. And a lot of them aren't even models. So they're like extra intimidated, right? So just having that rapport and making them feel comfortable in front of the camera, and just being able to let them know that, hey, like not every picture is going to be perfect. Like everything is just, we're all just kind of trying different things, and we'll get something great. So my third thing that I really didn't know, I'd probably say, is just watching and studying my own photos. I have a tendency to just forget details as I'm doing them, and then I pull them up later and I'm like, oh, I wish I would have paid attention. So, but as I start to study my actual photos, my own photos as well, and seeing like um what I really liked about that photo, and maybe like the almost photos that I liked, the ones where I'm like, and I'm looking at them, I'm like, oh, you know what would have made that actually a really good picture is if I hadn't cropped that like that, or maybe if I had like watched her hands a little bit more, because that looks a little bit awkward. So just studying my own photos just as much as I study other people's photos as well, because you can always look at someone else's and be like, well, that's perfect, but not know, if you're not going to study your own photos, like not know why yours isn't actually looking like that. So
That's brilliant. How did you get so smart on all this stuff?
on my courses.
Because all the stuff that you just said is basically what, me as a teacher wants everybody to get. Like, that's what I would want you to get. And the fact that you're photographing people, that's something that really intimidates a lot of new photographers as well. Like, did you have any hesitation, or you always knew you wanted to photograph people and you just dove in head first?
I think I've always known I wanted to photograph people. The thing that actually intimidates me is people when I don't know them. So I'm okay photographing people when I know them, and I know that they know that I'm taking a picture of them. Anytime I try my hand at like street photography or something, that's when I'm like, oh my goodness, this is scary, because I'm just sitting there all awkward, like, okay, I hope they don't get mad, or I hope this is okay. But I've always known that I want to photograph people. I love viewing like landscape photography and all that kind of stuff. But to me, landscape photography, I don't really get to have much of an artistic input in that. I find a nice location and I just have to like capture it, versus being able to, with people, I can create a location. I can create like a look, and I can create a mood and a feeling and that kind of stuff. So I've always known that I definitely wanted to be able to photograph people, for sure.
That's interesting, because when I started photography, like we were talking about this off camera earlier, like you were born when I was starting my business, right?
Yeah.
So I've been doing this a long time, like over 30 years. And when I first started, I was doing commercial photography and product photography. And one of the things I enjoyed about that, and doing things in the studio, like meticulous, like food, takes hours to arrange a plate of food that looks good, right? And what I enjoyed about that is I had the full control of the lighting and the placement and everything. And what you're doing with your planned sessions, right? You're choosing the location, you're choosing the person, you're helping them choose the clothes. Like, you're really doing like a styled shoot, right?
Oh, totally. Yeah.
So it gives you a lot more control of, just like you said, the photography, right?
Yeah.
People who are doing landscape photography, where their control lies is, when they're shooting it, like time of day, and then the processing stage, because they're doing a lot more in that end. Interesting.
Yeah.
Do you have any pieces of advice? What would you tell people that are just starting now, that are where you were a year ago, or maybe they've been doing it for a while, but they feel like they're stuck? Do you have anything that you would recommend? What would you say to those people?
I would definitely say the first thing is, it's probably not your gear. It's honestly probably just figuring out, because there's always bigger and better, and there's always something that somebody has that you're like, I want that. But also, I think even if you can figure out a way to take the images that you want on the gear that you have, then even if you get the gear that you eventually want, you'll already be a way better photographer than you were before. So yeah, the gear, as much as you want the gear, and I still want gear, don't get me wrong, I still want it, but I know that I can still make really great photos. I can do images, and I can do a lot of the things that I want to do without the gear that I have. And then if you honestly find that you're like, no, I absolutely need this gear for this shoot, then there's always rentals and stuff as well. But yeah, gear is one of those things where you probably don't actually need it. You probably just need to like figure out a way to become a better photographer that you can do it with the gear that you have, and then figure out the gear later. So
Like,
that would be
the thing
the
that
first
popped
thing.
into my head was love the one you're with, right? And that includes
Yeah,
your
totally.
camera too,
That totally
right?
includes your camera. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And then my second one would probably be just studying forms of art and mediums. For me, I really like the fashion photography side. So I love studying other photographers. I love studying fashion. I love studying posing and dancing and movement and all those kinds of things. I love studying directing because I'm working with other people a lot. And so just being able to like get my communication across to them exactly how I want something to look and how I want them to feel in a moment. I get that a lot from I like watching film directing and that kind of stuff, right? Because they have to direct actors into like
Mm-hmm.
expressing a certain emotion or doing a certain movement and that kind of stuff. So studying other art forms is a really great idea as well. Also, it's kind of a nice reprieve from just thinking so much photography all the time. So sometimes I just like to study other art forms just because I'm kind of tired of hearing photography, photography, photography all the time. So I'm still
Mm-hmm.
learning about photography and getting things that are going to help me with my photography without feeling like I'm sitting down and looking at my photography again. So that would be my next thing. And then I would say the third one is just studying other photographers that you really like and then actually comparing your work to their work. Is it their styles that you like, or what is it that is kind of stopping you or is not really quite the same as theirs that you really like?
Like dissect it a little bit, right? Like
Yeah, yeah,
what is it? Is it their style? Is it because it's black and
yeah.
white? Is it the subject matter that they're
Exactly.
shooting? Yeah.
Totally. And so again, I think that goes into kind of studying your own work as well as their work. And then being okay with obviously you don't want to completely imitate somebody else's stuff either. So as much as you want somebody to your stuff to look like somebody else's, it's never going to be hopefully it's never going to be exactly like theirs because then it'd be like, oh, well, that's just that person. So yeah, just studying other people's and studying your own work and really comparing those as well and being very intentional about what you shoot and when you shoot it. So
How have you managed to do like any work in the last few months during all this pandemic lockdown? Like, what have you focused on if you couldn't be doing photo shoots? Were you working on other aspects of photography?
yeah, I've just been looking actually honestly on the concept that I want to shoot. So the beginning of the quarantine especially, I was just there were so many things even on the technical side that I didn't know yet. So it was like the perfect time for me to actually pull up my Lightroom and try and start learning and using the Lightroom courses that I had. So I was like, okay, well now that I have time, I can actually like look at Lightroom and Photoshop and like try to edit some of the pictures that I've been doing for the last year and stuff. And so I've been looking at that. And then now that people are kind of starting to be out and about a little bit more again, so now I have already had concepts that I knew I wanted to shoot, but I just kind of fine tuned them a little bit. Saw like, okay, oh, I really want to shoot with that person. I think I want to do like this kind of concept, and then planning those kinds of shoots as well. And then also for me, it's been figuring out now that I know that I want to do fashion photography and I want to be a little bit more involved in that realm. So I've just been kind of reaching out to other photographers, other people in the industry and that kind of stuff. And so that's been my focus just on during this quarantine is just figuring out how to get to the next step that I want to be. Now that I know that this is something that I want to do, I'm just focused on how to do that. So
I think a lot of people turned back to processing because we were all stuck at home.
oh,
So
totally.
I was doing lots of webinars and things on Lightroom and Luminar, and people were working on images, which is a good thing because
Yeah.
we shoot so much that we don't always get caught
Oh
up.
yeah.
So it was a
Yeah.
good time to get caught up. But you mentioned a couple of other things that were really great pieces of advice, and I want to just bring them up again for everybody, which is study all art forms. You said that a couple of times, and I think that's so important as well because I love all art forms. Like whenever I travel, which is not happening right now, obviously,
Right.
I always find an art gallery. Like I was
Mhm.
in Amsterdam, and I went to go see some amazing like historic pieces of art.
Yeah.
I've been in France. I've been everywhere I go. New York. Like go to the Met. Wherever you
Mhm.
are, wherever you go in the world,
Yeah.
study art. And right now, the beautiful thing that happened with the pandemic is that a lot of these galleries, like the Met in New York, opened up to online stuff. They've created these virtual galleries, so you can go study these pieces of art from your sofa at home.
Totally.
So yeah, so it's great. So I love to study art, like look at the lighting and why did they compose that painting that way, and like because painters have a different skill set, but they have the ability to add or subtract things to their image, right, that we don't have. You know, you have to be very conscious as a photographer of what is in your frame. Like you said, like making sure there's not a garbage can in the background or a cigarette butt on the ground or something, right? So we have to be really careful about that. So absolutely study art forms. I love that. The other thing you mentioned, which is, you know, comparing yourself to yourself, like looking at your own work and studying, okay, what could I do better? But where was I a year ago as well? Like, do you ever look back at your work from a year ago to now and say, oh, wow, I'm doing really good?
Yep. Oh, 100%. And even like a year ago, there were concepts that I had in my head, but I didn't know how to actually do them on my camera. So even like simple things like understanding the depth of fields when I'm shooting, and like how to get pictures where maybe it looks like somebody is in like a forest, even though there's like 3 trees around them, right? And you're like, right. So a lot of times now, even when I go out to shoot, a lot of people will tell me like, oh, whoa, I wouldn't have even thought of this location, or like, you know, because instead of seeing it like such a big picture, I'm like, okay, I'm just gonna get smaller and smaller and smaller. Oh, you know what? That is a nice tree. We were gonna make it work, you know, even if it's just like a headshot all of a sudden, you know, or like maybe like only 3/4 of the body, right? Whereas people are like, whoa, this is really ugly. This is just like an industrial part. Like this is not a nice location at all, or whatever, right? And so just kind of looking at it, like you said, getting a little bit smaller and just being able to see it for maybe like the smaller details that it is, and getting rid of
one of the things that I liked about some of your images when I first saw them was that there's there's lots of geometry, lots of shapes, and they're very sort of geometric, right? And that really attracted me to your images. Is there something in your background, like why the shapes, or is that just something that attracted you to the photographers that you follow?
Honestly, the shapes was from one of the courses that I took. So I took a composition workshop as well. And so in it, we kind of talked about like different shapes and that kind of stuff, and creating shapes with your body, or obviously the obvious ones are having shapes in the background, triangles, that kind of stuff. And so triangles are usually one of my go-tos, because they're very strong, especially if I want something that's very strong or bold. I try to either create a shape with the person's body, whether they're kind of, you know, however they're posed or something, or have lines going across or whatever it is. So I often look for shapes just because for me it's the easiest way of kind of composing an image, especially with a person, where maybe you don't want the full scene, but you still want the background to help draw the image in. And so shapes is definitely something that I learned from that. And so I've always just kind of taken that as one of my like go-tos. So if I'm not sure what I'm going to take a picture of, if I'm like, oh my goodness,
find a shape.
Yeah. And then I'm like, okay, try to find a shape or something, or create a shape, or do something like that. So that's one of the things that I really like. And then I'm really trying to start getting into colors and textures as well. So we'll see.
Well, I think you do that really well. Like that's the other thing that you work really well with is colors. So I don't know if that's something you had an inherent sense of, or that you've developed over the last year.
Definitely developed. Yeah. Studying, again, that goes kind of into studying other forms of arts and stuff as well. So just studying color theory and color theory just through maybe like a painter's view, and like color theory and like the design and like fashion design view as well. So
it's all related. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, totally.
So one last question I have for you is, how much time do you think you have put into learning this craft over the last year? Like if you had to say, okay, every week I put in X number of hours, or I did X number of shoots over this last year.
I'm kind of one of those, when I'm at it, I'm like full time. Like I could probably be doing something for like 10, 12 hours a day when I'm really into it. And then there's like, maybe I'll do that for a couple weeks. And then there might be like 2 or 3 weeks where I'm like, don't even talk to me about photography. I don't want to look at photos. I don't want to think about photos. So I would say on average, I would say maybe like 4 or 5 hours, may,
A day?
no, probably a little. Yeah, probably, honestly, because I like to just do it, especially like at night. Like I'm always I'll just be sitting before I go to bed or something, and I'll maybe watch like a YouTube video, or I'll I'll go look at like some of the magazines that I really liked,
It's almost
or
like meditative, right?
yeah,
Like
it
it's
totally
like,
is. And you're just like, ooh, right? And so I just kind of look at this stuff and I look at that, and I'm thinking of like a concept that I would really like. Or Pinterest is one of the other things that I'm like, oh, I'm always scrolling and I'm like, oh, that's nice, that's nice, that's nice. Right. And so then I'm thinking of like what kind of model I would want to shoot that with and that kind of stuff. So I do it like, I guess I would say it is a daily thing, but it's not like a really intense, like, okay, I'm planning a particular shoot. It's more just like always something that I do in the back of my mind, because I don't have a TV at home either. So it's kind of, instead of my TV time, it's probably like I'm on my laptop and I'm probably doing something like looking up photography stuff or whatever it is. So that's
So I'm going to summarize some of the things that you said
yeah.
and wrap up. Is there anything else that you want to tell anybody? So I'm going to summarize in terms of what I think I've heard you say for everybody listening. So you've put in a lot of work, because I find that that is also key, that the doing part. So there's the studying part, and then there's the doing part.
Yeah.
And you've put in, like you said, maybe 4 to 5 hours a day, which is kind of almost like you're doing a full-time course. You know, when I was in college, I was doing that 8 hours a day and then some, right? So people want to know, how can I quickly increase my photography skills? There isn't a magic pill other than you need to put in the work, right? So you've definitely done that. You've definitely done that. Studying your own work, studying other artists' work and other photography work, that photographers' work, that is also another key. Learning what they're doing right, and looking at, you know, people's images on Instagram and trying to dissect it and figure out how to do it. That's helpful as well, right? You also mentioned knowing your gear and knowing how to use it. Your gear is going to take you farther if you know how to use it, as opposed to buying the fancy shiny new camera or the lens, right? Because if you don't know how to use it, I've done sessions in the past and helped people with tutoring sessions where, you know, they bought a flash or they bought some studio lights and they had no idea how to use them, right? So learn the gear that you have before you advance past your own gear, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So anything else you would like to wrap up with? What are your final words of wisdom?
While you were actually saying that, I was thinking of one more thing, and that's, don't be afraid to ask people. I have gotten actually so much help just from asking other photographers online. If I see somebody that, especially if they're local, it's a little bit easier to get a response from them, because they're they're usually much more likely to respond. Obviously, if you hit up like the most well-known fashion photographer in the world, and you'd be like, hey, how did you do this setup? They're probably not gonna right, like they're gonna be like, what? They're probably not even gonna see it, and if they are, they're gonna ignore it, right? But especially if you see like local photographers or somebody in like your community or something like that you
like join a group or something,
join like groups and that kind of stuff. Instagram, Google them. Like I always just do like the hashtags, and then from the local, so like YEG photography or Calgary photographers, that kind of stuff. And then I'll find images that I like. And if I like them, I'm like, hey, like I loved your stuff. Can we meet for coffee? Or like, or how did you do that? Or whatever it is, right? And so I find that the photography community, in my experience, has been really amazing in that way, where honestly, I don't think there's been a single person that's just been like, no thanks. You know what I mean? So they've all been extremely helpful. If I'm just kind of like, hey, like, I really like how you did that, or just, I really love your page. Oh, great. Like we can meet up one time. And I'm like, oh, okay. So, so just don't be afraid to ask other people, and just like tell other people like, hey, like I would love to be where you're at. Like what kinds of things have you done, and that kind of stuff. So I found that it's been a really good community. So
awesome. So where can people find you if they want to see more of your pictures?
They can find me on my Instagram for now. I am working on setting up a website and portfolio and everything online. But for now, just on my Instagram at ludia.maricio. So yeah.
Awesome. Thanks so much. For those of you watching, if you made it to the end, congratulations, because this is where your journey begins, right? I always say
Totally.
photography is a journey, it's not a destination, and we never just magically arrive and all of a sudden we're there and we've achieved magical stardom with photography. So it's a
Totally.
journey, it's a process. Enjoy it. And I will share a few other links to some other articles, including one that I just did on 12 historic portrait photographers that you need to know. So if you haven't already seen that one, check that out. Thanks, and until next time, we'll see you again.